It's usually at the Tata Theatre that I introduce this debate, and I usually always begin by saying that the term debate has fallen into disrepute because television really invites people to come and fight with each other, shout loudly, abuse each other, and pretends it's a debate. And I always say that this is different. This is an audience of educated, civilized people. We won't do anything like it. Well, guess what? This debate is effectively a television debate. Everybody's going to be on little windows, and you're going to have to listen to us on that. But I think I can say with some confidence that our panelists will maintain, our debaters actually, will see I'm falling into television speak, that our debaters will maintain the high standards that previous Little Life debates have always held. Now, I'm supposed to keep you entertained till the results of the first vote are in, which I hope won't be very long. But while we're there, let me tell you a bit about the debate. The debate is essentially, I think, supposed to be about two visions of India. It says, is democracy dying? And we've had some debate about, some discussion about what that means. But judging by the composition of the panels and judging by what the MC said in her impartial sort of way, there is no doubt that this debate is really going to be some kind of referendum on the state of India today and the state of Indian democracy. Are we really in bad trouble, or are we just surviving, as India has always done, making what Shashi Tharoor calls a slightly pachydermal progress towards the future? I think the results are in. So before I actually call on, can we get the result display? The results of the first vote? Nope. Don't seem to be seeing any results. Okay, I shall continue my stand-up. Oh, I think we have them. Great. Okay. And the results are, as we expected, pretty one-sided. Let's see how many people's minds we can change. 83 to 17 is a huge, huge figure. But, of course, there is room for people to change their minds. And I've seen in previous debates, we've had the panel, the audience overwhelmingly on one side and then changing completely by the end of the debate. So let me first ask Mallika Sarabhai to propose the motion. All yours, one.
Good evening. One of the boldest decisions taken by the makers of Free India was to adopt a democracy that gave one vote to every Indian. It was a huge risk. Most Indians, shackled by poverty, ill health, and ignorance, did not know what it meant to have a key and a say in matters that ruled their lives. They had no concept of free will, of a destiny not ruled by the accident of birth. But breaking away from earlier electoral exercises that gave voting rights to less than 10% of our people, universal suffrage, written into our constitution, gave every Indian equal standing in independent India. For the first time, we were no longer subjects, but citizens, and our voting rights were not given to us, but belonged to us. A bird born and brought up in a cage fears freedom. Millions of Indians, too, were the same. They thought that the hierarchies of the past were right and just, a result of their sins. They felt that even an exploitative protector was better than the terror of having to take your life into your own hands, that the devil I knew was better than the devil I don't. Giving fellow Indians the information, courage, and strength to think differently for a working, active, genuine democracy is an ongoing exercise. The democratic ideals of equality, the right to freedom to think, to seek, to change, to believe, and to question are still far from universally accepted or acted upon in our country. Some individuals in all governments have believed in the basic tenets of democracy, that we must all be equal, given equality of footing and opportunity in a country that looks after its weakest. But not a single government in entirety, including elected officials, bureaucracy, the police, the judiciary, has truly been able to divest itself of force and feelings of superiority and entitlement given by birth, education, or majoritarianism. For the most part, Indian individuals, families, organizations, and society is totally undemocratic. Under different governments, individual citizens have had more or less a voice to demand change, to express dissent or doubt. Over decades, it has become politically expedient to think of us not as citizens, but as voters or vote banks, forgotten between electoral cycles. Over these decades, two legislations in particular have tried to empower millions of citizens into becoming active members of democracy. The first was in 1992, the 73rd and 74th Amendment, which gave grassroots organization the power to decide their own future. The next was the introduction of the right to information, bringing transparency at all levels of government. The RTI was transformative. Suddenly, every citizen had the right to question how every decision allegedly for her or him was taken, asking from the Patwari to the Prime Minister and the Supreme Court. And for the first time, the response given was time-bound, and the official in charge of it had to pay for late or obfuscated answers. No possibilities of great pendencies here. But no government actually wants to be answerable, for governments are also made up of people like us, power-hungry, self-seeking, greedy, frightened, craven. The first hurdles came within months of the act becoming the law in the hands of the very government that enacted it. But over the early years, robust protests saw that it was not shrunk too much. Today, 6 to 8 million people have used the RTI and have unearthed thousands of scams. Some have lost their lives. The last 6 years have been different. A focused project has been in place to undermine the entire framework of transparency, accountability, and participation. Two bills that strengthen the RTI, the Lokpal and the Whistleblowers Protection legislation, have been sidelined. Short shrift has been given to public consultation, and laws that impact millions are passed as ordinances recently under the difficulties of the pandemic. No consultation or deliberations are in place. In spite of the unparalleled tragedy of the millions of starving homeless people trudging home, labor laws have been enacted to take away even the fig leaf that they felt they had. And the other pillars of democracy, media, judiciary, public institutions, have been subverted. I could talk about which cases our courts have decided to hear urgently and which not, of which journalists have been imprisoned without bail and which special ones have not. I could talk of all the students, artists, civil society, workers, academicians who are in jail. I could mention the careful placement in key positions of the compliant and the rewards given to the bhaktas. I could mention the organized hatred on social media, the 3 a.m. raids on dissenters, the absolute intolerance to the fundamental pillars of democracy, the right to question, to know, to participate, to dissent. But all of you know of this. I ask myself whether it is not we, the people, who are the greatest dangers to our democracy. Our silence, our secret belief in our superiority, our deep-seated belief that all Indians are not equal, that Indians, some deserve justice and some do not. Are these not the enemies of a thriving democracy? Are we not the ones who accept decisiveness as great leadership without using our rights of freedom for information and self-expression to delve into the people we give power to? Yes, Indian democracy is in great danger, and we, the people, are responsible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarabhai. May I now ask R. Jagannathan to oppose the motion?
Yeah, thank you, Vir. I would like to just start with a caveat. I do not plan to make this a very political discussion. I would look at more fundamental things so that we understand democracy in better light. I would like to make 7 broad points. First, Indian democracy has deep roots, and it's not based on what some far-sighted leader bequeathed to us some years ago, some decades ago, or what is written into the constitution. Democracy flourishes in India because its soul and culture are supportive of it. Our problems may in fact be the exact opposite. of reining in an excess of free speech and gross indiscipline that leads to anarchic nature. Second, our problem is our secularism is a sham, and that contributes to the lack of democracy in this country. Pluralism is our natural rhythm, and that's far more democratic than what we call secularism, which is neither fish nor fowl. I'm not indulging in mere semantics here. Secularism evolved in Europe where state and papal authority were in conflict. Both wanted sovereignty. They solved the problem by separating church from state. But here's the thing, both retained separate autocratic power over the same person, the individual. Thus, the individual becomes a schizophrenic, learning to live with two bosses, two autocratic bosses. This is the problem. Our secularism, which I've said is neither fish nor fowl, has done enormous damage to democracy, for it is minoritarian, and what we call majoritarian is nothing but the majority demanding equal rights. I'll give you three quick examples. No secular state should be running religious places, but just the 5 southern states and increasingly many northern states run over 100,000 temples. Where is my right to practice and propagate my religion if the state owns all my means of propagating it? Secondly, we have the RTE. We talked about the RTI, which is a very good thing. We talk about the RTE. Why is it that it applies only to majority institutions? So it's a minoritarian law trying to universalize education by helping the poor being educated in private schools. So again, it's wrong. The third thing is CAA, a law to help the persecuted fast track their citizenship, is now being sold on the false narrative that it is against Indian citizens. Okay, so we want equal rights here. That means the persecutor and the persecutee must have the same rights to early citizenship as it's like telling somebody in Nazi Germany that the persecuted Jews and Nazis must get the same right to citizenship in America. This is what is wrong. So we need to replace this minoritarian secularism with pluralism so that acceptance of difference is seen in all spheres and not artificially restricted to just the religious sphere. Secularism is a limiting and undemocratic idea for India. It's irrelevant to India. The third point I would like to make is the threats to democracy come from its alleged defenders and not from the threat of majoritarianism. Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, some of the three main religions that we know, are not fundamentalist creeds. They are diverse by nature and inclination. They do not derive their truths from merely a historical figure or one religious text. They saw themselves as seekers and not believers. That's a fundamental difference in what Hindu thought is, what Buddhist thought is, what Jain thought is. Fourth, our democratic institutions are ill-suited to the Indian genius and attitudes. In particular, our parliamentary democracy is wrong for us. We need a presidential system backed by a legislature which is populated through proportional representation. Both presidential system and a proportionally represented parliament are inclusive institutions, and they are better than the first past post system where parties can get a working majority by getting anywhere like 30 to 35% of the popular vote. Now, we started making an issue of this only in 2014 because the party in power got a majority with about 31% of the popular vote. But this has been the problem all through. It is not something that got invented in 2014 or 2019. So we need a different kind of structure to make our democracy, our innate democracy work. Fifth, if democracy is under threat, the problem is not in Delhi or the central government, nor did the threat emerge in 2014. Our problem, which is largely a media created one, is an excessive focus on what the government in Delhi or in at the center does. But this is the one government that is fully performing in full public glare, both of the national media and the international media. It cannot do anything wayward beyond a point. It is the mini autocrats that rule the states that go under our radar. And our liberals don't care what happens there unless these states happen to be ruled by, say, a BJP government. So our media creates fake narratives. Fake news is not the problem. Fake narratives are the problem because you think only one party or one ideology is the problem. Sixth, right from the Nehruvian era, we invested in public goods like freebies and subsidies, but not public goods like good law and order, universal education and healthcare, good infrastructure. This is the problem. The gaps are being slowly remedied now, but these wrong priorities flowed top down from an elite and unaccountable political system. The judiciary more or less appoints itself. Again, we are an oddball among democracies where no judiciary appoints judges on its own. The other thing is the police derive their support not from the law, but politicians' temporary power, and the bureaucracy is a law unto its own. Seventh, we tend to cry wolf a little too often when there is no wolf visible. We know if some party you don't like wins an election, then of course it's a threat to democracy. EVMs must have been doctored. If the judiciary gives you a verdict that you don't like, then the judiciary is compromised. If the police act against somebody or don't act on somebody, again it's a problem, though the real problem is that they're not able to implement the laws that the politicians want to enact. You have things like these. So your real problem is we keep crying wolf. If a Reserve Bank governor is released at the end of his term, we say, again, it's a threat to democracy. And we cry wolf too often, we are not going to be able to protect democracy or anything. I rest my case. Democracy has solid roots here. What it does not have is the right kind of people advocating it.
Thank you, Jaggi. I mean, I'm kind of amazed. Everyone is kept within 7 minutes. That isn't usually how it works when we do this live. But I mean, I think it's interesting. I said at the beginning, this is going to get political, though the motion sounded quite ideological. What we're talking about, I mean, just to sort of make it clear, is not plain democracy. Democracy by itself is not a term that means very much. But liberal democracy, the values, the freedoms, the care for minorities, the sense of free speech, the entitlement of being a citizen on equal terms with everybody else, and of course secularism in a democracy. I think what our speakers are focusing on more and more is whether that kind of democracy is in danger. Malika obviously feels it is in danger. On the other hand, Jaggi says not only is it not in danger, if there is any danger, it comes from liberals who practice a kind of minorityism and a selective targeting of the BJP and its supporters. Okay, I think those arguments will be rebutted by our next speaker. Usually when we do this debate in the Tata Theatre, there's a little hush over the audience while we wait for him to come on, followed by frenzied applause. We're not going to get that this time, but nevertheless, welcome Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you very much, Vir. Actually, I want to pick up exactly where you left off, which is to say that when we're talking about what democracy is, I've written a book just now out called The Battle of Belonging, where I talk about our civic nationalism as opposed to the ethno-religious nationalism that some are promoting. And that kind of nationalism in India relies less on instruments of power and domination than on a network of institutions that constitute checks and balances on the government's power, formally limit the government's authority, the executive's authority, and prevent the country from descending into crass majoritarianism by protecting the rights of religious, linguistic, sexual, cultural, and other minorities. So the formal mechanisms that support this kind of democracy, rule of law and law courts, parliamentary accountability to prevent governmental overreach, devolved institutions at local levels to offer alternative sources of power and authority, a vibrant civil society and a free press, independent think tanks and universities, a strong opposition, some would say arguably above all of this support the system, but not necessarily the government of the day. And in this kind of liberal democratic constitutionalism, opposition or criticism is never dismissed as treasonous, but recognized as an intrinsic part of governance. Equal access is provided to education, citizenship, community activities, languages of everybody. National symbols should eschew the divisive for the unifying. Legal structure should buttress the primacy of such civic institutions over religious or ethnic ones. All of these things, right up to, this is a literary festival after all, I would argue that books, magazines, films, poetry, and theatre are meant not just to offer entertainment, but critique and often resistance to the prevailing orthodoxy. That's why Malika is with us today. So key to this kind of civic nationalism, liberal constitutionalism, has to be the celebration of diversity, ethnic, linguistic, religious, political. Now, this is what I talk about when I say that democracy is in danger, because all of this has been threatened in recent developments. You know, when you look at, if you break down what I was saying in this quick summary, there are certain democratic ideas, right? The principles in the Constitution, justice, equality,
I think you've gone mute.
fraternity. No, I'm not mute on my computer. Are you not able to hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, so as I was saying, there are a number of institutions and principles in democracy: justice, equality, fraternity, the right to freedom, to constitutional remedies, all of that. There's a constitutional architecture of institutional checks and balances, including autonomous institutions like the Election Commission, the Information Commission, the Reserve Bank of India, the UGC, media, all of that, and civil society organizations and citizen forums. And at the top of the pyramid is, in fact, the people of the country, because their economic, social, and political well-being must be guaranteed. Now, in all of this, we are seeing attacks, unfortunately, in recent years on all of these. We're seeing attacks, frankly, growing religious intolerance, sectarian violence, the targeted disenfranchisement and marginalization of minorities, the acceptance of difference that Swami Vivekananda taught us is so fundamental to Hindu civilization culture, is absent from those who claim to speak on behalf of the Hindus in government. We are seeing rising incidents of communal violence driven by mob lynching zealots and Gaurakshak vigilantes, in which human beings have been actually killed in the name of protecting cows. One scholar famously called ours today, for many people, a republic of fear. And this is because of the fomenting and the rise of a dangerous ethno-religious nationalism under the Hindutva project, which is giving us a polarizing and chauvinistic idea of who actually is Indian, what being Indian is all about, and which has subverted the principles of civic nationalism. In the process, dissent is portrayed as seditious. Criticism of the government is dismissed as anti-national. So the prime minister equals a ruling party, equals a government, equals a state, equals a nation. So you criticize any one of these, you're anti-national. This sort of stuff is dangerous. When Jaggi says, as he did a minute ago, that there's excesses of free speech leading to anarchy, I'm horrified, because who gets to decide that? The entire point of free speech is that the individual exercising it should have the right to do so. Instead, we're seeing the intimidation of the media, on economic pressure, political intimidation at all levels. He's already mentioned the reduction of parliament to a rubber stamp because of the ruling party's majority, or a notice board as far as the rest is concerned. The passing of contentious legislation. Government proposes, opposition opposes. Whenever a vote is called, the government's brute majority disposes. That's really not parliamentary democracy. On the judiciary, it's not just a question of what judgments you like and don't like. As Jagannathan said, it's actually about double standards, where, as was pointed out earlier by Ratnabali, when some get a different standard of justice, when habeas corpus petitions are not heard for months after Kashmir, but a certain news anchor gets off the hook in 48 hours, there is something seriously troubling. And we've had a situation in which our judiciary isn't the only institution. The Election Commission has had questions asked about it. The Information Commission's autonomy has been completely stripped by the government, with salaries now being decided by them, and record levels of vacancies. If you don't fill the commissioners' jobs, you don't actually have to get anything done. The CBI, the cage parrot, the Central Statistical Organization, which has seen resignations. Frankly, when you talk about our institutions, it seems so appropriate that we're debating this motion on the same day that the nation led by the PM is celebrating World Toilet Day, because the autonomy of our democratic institutions is being flushed down the toilet. So I'm simply going to end by saying there is a process of democratic deconsolidation. Malika is right that data shows that there's a lot of dilution in our people's support for democracy. It's a worldwide phenomenon, sadly, but in India, we are amongst the worst in the World Values Survey of the percentage of Indian respondents answering that a leader who doesn't have to bother with parliament and elections is better to run the country. 70% of Indians said this in the World Values Survey. And we have an Azim Premji University survey showing over 50% in 4 large states of the country expressing a preference for an authoritarian alternative to democracy. So I want to conclude by saying that if the assault on our institutions and democratic practices persist, frankly, we must realize political parties and the ruling powers of the day will come and go. But no leader is immortal. India is. And it's essential that those entrusted with being the stewards of our democracy should protect it, not undermine it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashi. Thanks so much. Technology is a wonderful thing. We used to do this in one room. People used to stand up and make their speeches. Now we're all in different cities, in Delhi, in Bangalore, all over. But one of the problems with doing this on the basis of technology is, well, frankly, it doesn't always work. Shazia Ilmi has been listening to the debate and will join the debate. Unfortunately, we're having trouble with her camera. So we're going to put her picture on the screen, as you can see, and she will talk, and hopefully you won't really miss the way she looks because she makes so much sense. You don't even have to look at her. Welcome, Shazia Ilmi.
Thank you so much. My senior, Mr. Jagannathan, Malika ji, who I admire greatly, and my most eloquent friend, Shashi Tharoor. Just wanted to point out finally, there is a toilet in many to speak of that the poor can use and actually flush. And they have been using the toilet and flushed it enough number of times. Every time this entire talk of democracy being in danger has come up. So, well, I don't know about democracy, but my wonderful friend's beloved party's existence is definitely in danger. And at the rate at which the congressmen and women are migrating to, politically salubrious clients, I wonder when our own Shashi ji, who I'm a big fan of, will become a unique member along with the cadres of a politically endangered species, so to speak. If indulge me, if you will, my answer to Shashiji's most brilliant and breathless articulation as he speaks for the motion would be the same as Portia in Merchant of Venice. And you know what Portia said? She said, good sentences and well pronounced. And Nerissa, her maid in waiting, said, they would be better if well followed. Portia then says, and I would like to repeat these words to Shashi. If to do were as easy as to know what were good to do, chapels had been churches, and poor men's cottages, princes' palaces. It is a good divine that follows his own instructions. I can easier teach 20 what were good to be done than to be one of the 20 to follow mine own teaching. So I would remind you very politely of all the instances where your party, Shashi, has been guilty of all that you've just accused BJP of. I would, of course, we have to start off by the first time in Shashi's own state in, I think, 1959, when EMS Nambutri Pad's government was dismissed by Jawaharlal Nehru. And of course, coming to emergency in 1975, your party has been ingloriously known for where freedom of speech and of the press was clamped down most brutally. And, speaking to all our friends here, a lot of students and professionals alike, we didn't have to go very far. We remember what happened in Anna Hazare's Andolan. I was very much a part of it. It started off as a ragtag, group of people wanting to speak against the corruption of UPA 2. And we saw how brutally Anna Hazare was dismissed and thrown off in a jail. We saw what happened to Baba Ramdev. I was one of the many youngsters, if I can call myself that, or one of the many people who were there on the street when Nirbhaya Andolan happened. And all of us dealt with the tear gas shells and police brutality. So when we talk about about the freedom of the press and democracy being in danger, we must realize that the course of the political discourse is obviously manipulated in the brawling camps of the leftists who imagine themselves to be liberals. They are the most intolerant lot that I know of. And in the newsrooms, in academia, which are the only bastions really where they are thriving and are not endangered in any way whatsoever, is where they decide the political narrative of the day and how to really vilify the government of the times. So our motion of the debate and the general notion that democracy is in danger is obviously a construct of some very clever minds, and it's as hackneyed and predictable as ever. Mr. Jagannathan mentioned the EVMs, and we remember that not so long back, it was the Congress party and all their comrades who were crying foul about the EVMs. Parties like AAP enjoyed the people's mandate when they won in Delhi, and they sulked when they lost in Punjab and Goa. And not so long back, all of the opposition got together and demanded that EVM machine should be replaced by the paper ballot, until, of course, they won in Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Chhattisgarh. So I feel that ever since Prime Minister Modi has taken over and the reins as a Prime Minister, it has become, it has been bandied around that this is a democracy, which is the democracy is in danger, and democracy is the tyranny of the majority. Well, this is, my friends need to wake up, because first past the post system means just that. We spoke about judiciary some time back, and we have the good old Indian liberals, who I don't call liberal at all. They were swooning over Justice D.Y. Chandrachud. And so as long as he writes passionately dissent notes on Aadhaar and the arrest of the 5 activists in the Bhima Koregaon case, he's hailed as a man who doesn't mince words. He is not afraid, and he's a judge with a mind of his own, and who calls a spade a spade. But when he, signs a bail for Arnab Goswami, who was illegally detained, and in a case which did not merit custodial interrogation, the same liberals become quiet, because Arnab belongs to the right wing, so to speak. I feel that when it comes to speaking against the motion, I'm so clear, but I know democracy has been strained. Whether it's emergency and what is happening now in the state of Maharashtra, in Orissa, where my friend Jay Panda's family is being harassed. They own the biggest channel there, and day in and day out, there are false cases, and they're being harassed at all the time. Similarly, in West Bengal, if you really want to know where democracy is under strain and really is in danger, you would witness them in many states, in Maharashtra, Orissa, and West Bengal, even as we speak. But I think the popular narrative and the fashionable thing to do is to just demonize Modi and talk about just how intolerant this government is, where everything else points to the contrary. I rest my case.
Thank you, Shazia. But I think that concludes the opening speeches. But just to summarize roughly where we are, I think, at a stage where, Shazia was the most expressly political speech we've heard tonight, but there have been political undercurrents to everybody's speeches. We're using democracy, it's clear here, not so much as democracy, but as a code word for 2 very different visions of India. One is a vision of India that celebrates a certain kind of secularism, that celebrates personal freedoms, that celebrates diversity, that talks about India being a country, whether you're a Hindu or a Muslim or whatever, you have an equal stake in what happens, where the government does not use its enforcement agencies, its police forces to stifle dissent, where everybody apparently lives in a much happier situation. And there's a second vision, that's a vision I think articulated by Jagannathan and Shazia, which is that this was not really what happened before Modi. This is an idealized situation, a thing that anti-Modi people imagine happened. Indian democracy was never perfect. That in fact we now have liberals who adopt double standards to take their own interests forward, who are happy to give everybody personal freedom, but are unhappy when Arnab is given bail, to use Shazia's example. And the argument there is that, and Jagannathan said this best, that what we call secularism in fact was a form of minorityism, a sense of catering or appealing or pandering to minorities in an effort to keep yourselves in power. So that's what this debate is really about. It's what Shashi and Malika consider their vision of India. it's what Jagannathan and Shazia say was A, never a perfect vision of India and was never the perfect India they claim it was. And they say is now being raised as a bogey, as a cover for liberal hypocrisy, as a way of attacking this government and the Prime Minister. Everybody gets 2 minutes to rebut the arguments that have been made. So let's start with Mallika.
I want to first react to Shazia saying that hundreds of Congress people are walking over and joining the BJP. I want to know how healthy a democracy is when people from parties with allegedly such different ideologies can be bought, and there are sting operations to prove this, to suddenly become the other party and be made into ministers or given tickets. Is this a healthy democracy? According to me, not. The second is I want to talk about myself as a performer, as somebody who has always stood up against the mainstream, has wanted to be independent, has wanted to look at the myths of Hinduism that are very dear to me, to look at a different voice that is not patriarchal, that is not Brahminical, and that is not the Mai Baap Ki Sarkar. 30 years ago, I created a piece called Sita's Daughters and performed it over 600 times in this country. Yes, my Sita asked Ram questions that he had to answer. Then I wasn't afraid. Today I cannot do it because I will be trolled on social media just for saying the R of Ram if I don't agree with the Jai Shri Ram and I say Jai Siya Ram. I, as an artist, am feeling bound, deafened, thwarted, squashed. I, as a woman, am afraid. This is not a democracy that I want. This is not an India that I want. And this is not a state of being for any Indian that is healthy. I am a deeply privileged person. And if I can feel this, think of what that migrant, that child suckling at the dead mother's breast must feel or will feel when she grows up. This is all that I have to say on this rebuttal.
Jaggi, would you like to rebut them?
Yeah, I'd like to take up some points mentioned by Shashi and also by Mallika. One, Shashi talks about civic nationalism. This sounds as though it's some reference to some garbage removal or street lighting. It is not relevant to a civilizational state like India. India was not born in 1947. We have a 5,000-year history. Our nationhood and thought of togetherness were created by the tread of millions of pilgrims going from one end of the other to one end of the country to geography to the other. Second thing, we keep talking about majoritarianism. Tell me what part of Hinduism ever sounds like majoritarianism? It is by definition very diverse, disparate, almost divisive. So you are trying to say that all this is the same thing. When we talk about majoritarianism, it is an idea that comes from a very Abrahamic concept where there is one founder, one book, one set of fundamentals. Hinduism never has any such thing. So what majoritarianism are you talking about? Especially when we have ways of separating them into castes and saying, oh, but tribals are not Hindu, oh, but Dalits are not Hindus. So you keep saying that, and then you say this is one big 80% majority that is trampling on the rights of the other 20%, which is again a ridiculous idea. Third thing, we talk about judiciary and how it's lost its independence. My problem is this has been the case all along. There was an Indian Express report which says that between 2008 and 2011, during the peak time of the UPA's power, 18 of the 21 Supreme Court judges took up post-retirement jobs immediately. One guy was so eager to take up his post-retirement jobs that he actually retired in advance so that he could take up the next job. So this is the way the judiciary has been managed all through. So if you think the BJP is managing the judiciary, I don't think it's anything new. It's been all along. Our democracy is a work in motion. It's a work in progress. It is a flawed democracy, but we need to fix it. It is not about the people who are currently in power.
Thank you, Jaggi. Shashi Tharoor, would you like to do your rebuttal now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Vir. I'll start with Shazia, since I did respond to some of Jagi's points in my own statement. Shazia startled me with all her extensive quotations from Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, because after all, as The Merchant of Venice is a play I know rather well, has Antonio saying the devil can cite scripture for his purpose. And what's interesting is that the line which says that a stage where every man must play a part and mine a sad one. That's the role that Shazia chose to play. Graziano said, let me play the fool. And I'm afraid she took that too seriously. But as Bassanio said in Merchant of Venice, I like not fair terms and a villain's mind. The problem with the BJP that she speaks for is precisely that in Lorenzo's words in Merchant of Venice, it is fit for treason, stratagems and spoils. But what to do? They said in the play that lovers cannot see the petty follies that themselves commit. And I fear that Shazia hasn't seen this. She talked about toilets and running water. I beg your pardon, she talked about toilets but forgot about the fact that most of them built by this government have no running water, so you can't flush anything down it, let alone actually come up with the kinds of results that Shazia would like to boast about. She says the Congress party is endangered, but not democracy. Well, the fact is that in a democracy, we do need strong institutions, and those are what I was talking about. The opposition is part of it. We are proud to be a strong opposition, but there are many more institutions autonomous of the political process that I explained are actually endangered. On Jagi's point, the important issue is when he talked about an excess of free speech, the question is who gets to decide who has a right to speak. He disingenuously dismissed the opposition to the CAA, but the problem was always with the link to a nationwide register of citizens that the Home Minister propounded in both houses of Parliament. That's what extended the danger of the CAA to Indian citizens, a point he completely skipped. And then he talked in terms of the civilizational culture of India. I'm with him on that. I've argued this at great length in my own writing, but that involves acceptance of difference, not the discrediting of difference and dissent. Thank you.
Thanks, Shashi. Shazia, do you want to take on Shashi and continue the pattern of the Merchant of Venice?
Absolutely. So I would like to remind Shashi that he forgot the most important speech about the quality of mercy not being strained. And the
I'll be merciful.
It's not strained. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes, and upon the place beneath. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes, and blesseth. So this is the speech that you should know a little something about. The second point that you made about the toilets, finally somebody is talking about them. The point that you made about water was also predictable, because that is out of the 6 crore toilets made, obviously some would have water and some would not have, depending on the states and their administration. So, this is again coming back to clever words. Good sentences and well-pronounced sentences and great English cannot masquerade as good governance. I think finally, this is high time that we speak about, the colonial hangover that we've suffered from, and actually embrace who we are and the civilizational ethos of this country, which is Bahuda, which is all-inclusiveness, instead of imposing ideas of, liberal democracy or onto our nation. And most importantly, when we talk about judiciary and the examples that are cited, we, like Jagannathan said, that this has always happened. And so many times it is the Congress government which has dismissed so many governments, so we've lost count. As for Malika ji, when she talked about congressmen joining and leaving, Malika ji, it's everybody's right to join whichever party they want to or not. But, just demonizing one party and calling all that it stands for evil also is
Shazia, your time is up, but keep going. Given that we can't see you, you can have a minute or two to make your points.
Yes, I'd like to say also, when we talk about democracy in danger, it becomes, as a favorite sort of a slogan in these times. And it comes from, and I want to remind everybody, that it was Rajiv Gandhi's government when there were these chants of Islam being in danger. And it is Rajiv Gandhi's government that really stifled the voice of Muslim women. You speak of being a Hindu woman. I want to speak as a Muslim woman. and as to what was done to the status of Muslim women, as making. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
Yes. So we all remember how Rajiv Gandhi's government succumbed to Plagidom, to Mulladom, and really stifled the voices of so many Muslim women by not giving them the due, what they sought from the Constitution and what even the Quran gave. So I think this is high. It's high time that we really get out of the binary, this left and right, and see what is real, and decide, on the merits and demerits of every government, instead of just blindly following, at the age-old diktats of, what is correct and what is not, and trying to be like a liberal, because to be a liberal nationalist is not an oxymoron, and I can claim as much right to the epitaph of being liberal as can Malika and others.
Thank you, Shazia.